Hello and welcome. I'm Connor Lokar, economist on the team here at ITR. Thank you for joining me on my latest Trends Talk. And today we're going to be talking about keeping sight of the business cycle through the noise and really about trying to balance the bluster, versus the business cycle. Now, geopolitical events and other what I'll call black swan-ish events, things that aren't confined to the world of leading indicators and things that you can necessarily predict, in general, make excellent fodder for the daily news cycle, but their immediate impact on economic trend lines those that we examine here at ITR are often overestimated by the public and the media who love to cover them. And I think the recent attack on Saudi Aramco and Saudi Arabia's oil assets and the subsequent instant market reaction and sharp pullback in oil prices is a nice test case, and I call it a launching point for this discussion. Now, it's not to say that the attacks on Saudi Aramco was irrelevant by any stretch, but in the immediate aftermath, we saw oil prices jump as much as 16% in the days immediately following an attack, and that came with fears of a global oil supply crunch. It was gripping the globe, and the news cycle was evoking visions of a 1970s era oil crisis with gas lines wrapped around the corner, a consumer price shock in the United States, hammering consumers with higher prices at the pump and higher fuel costs as we head into the heating season, and creating that lovely nightmare scenario of doom and gloom, which lasted for all of about 5 minutes. Now, just a week removed or so, just over a week, we have seen those fears subside. When we look at oil prices, West Texas Intermediate, we've seen that settle back into the upper $50 per barrel range. I think when I last looked at it this morning, it was right near $58 a barrel. And, mind you, that's actually down 18% from where prices were a year ago. And I'll add directly in line with ITR's forecast, which has been in place since November 2018. Now, to be sure, there's more dust to settle, and Saudi Arabia has immense crude oil storage available to draw on and export, and for at least the near term, mask what the full extent of their diminished output capacity actually is, while they try to repair their processing facilities and assets. But the business cycle is often more relevant. We see currently sagging industrial output in places like Western Europe, Brazil, really the rest of South America, Mexico, Japan, and then we see slowing industrial production in Canada, the United States, China, and really the world more generally. We see decelerating industrial production. It's that sagging demand curve and that business cycle pressure that's really having more of an impact than the supply side disruptions that we've seen in Saudi Arabia. And again, as large and dominant as an oil supplier as Saudi Arabia may be. Now, the cooling global economy and that softening demand overall, that is depressing pricing, particularly relative to where we were at this time last year. Now, if these attacks had occurred, say, 18 months ago, when the global economy was nearing its business cycle peak, demand was accelerating, then it'd probably be a different story and a bit more of a shock than what we've seen. And really, again, to kind of pull it back and pull the scope up, the Saudi Aramco attack is just, the latest instance we've had to contend with at ITR, whether it be on stage during a keynote on the road or on webinars with our consulting clients. There's always that latest event, be it a change in domestic or foreign monetary policy, think a 25 basis point cut from the Fed, or a terrorist attack, or an election, or a vote, say the UK referendum, which is still playing out with Brexit here several years later, or the latest piece of legislation, or tax policy, and on and on and on. As apolitical, Austrian-leaning economists here at ITR, we've debunked this time and again, that the overhyping of those political or geopolitical items, as fun as it may be, as far as how it relates to the immediate short-term economic impacts, it is often overstated and overestimated how quickly that can swing the trend lines. These things take time to show up in those trend lines and the business cycle, if they ever do at all. It's fine to read up on the Bluster, just don't get lost in it. Don't lose sight of the economy overall and that business cycle and what those trend lines mean for your business. I'm Connor Lokar, and I thank you for joining me.